It started with a water balloon, a bright red one, half filled, clutched in the tiny, chocolate-colored fist of a boy barely tall enough to see over the back of a park bench. It was a Sunday afternoon in Foxwood Heights, a polished, pretentious suburb where the grass was mowed twice a week, the HOA fines came with a smile, and anything loud, poor, or unfamiliar was quickly labeled as a problem. 7-year-old Jameer was laughing, barefoot on the grass, his giggles rising like music through the park. His shirt was soaked from the game. His tiny sneakers, abandoned in the corner, were caked with dried mud. Around him, 3 other neighborhood kids, black and brown, squealed and dodged water balloons like they were in a summer blockbuster. A harmless scene. Unless you were Officer Brent Holloway. From his patrol car parked across the street, Holloway squinted through his aviators and scowled. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel. His radio crackled, but he wasn't listening. He was watching, judging. He saw noise. He saw chaos. He saw trouble. He didn't see childhood. Possible juvenile disturbance, he mumbled into the radio, even though there was none. Group of black minors, no adult supervision. He stepped out of his cruiser, heavy boots thudding on pavement, belt rattling, walk stiff with manufactured purpose. He didn't stroll. He stormed. The parents on the benches blinked up, confused. "Is there a problem, officer?" Holloway didn't answer. He walked straight into the center of the laughter and pointed. "You, drop that. Hands where I can see them." Jameer blinked. The balloon slipped from his hand and burst on the grass. "Sir?" he asked softly. His voice still had the lisp of a first grader, but Holloway didn't care. He grabbed the boy's wrist, turned him around, and twisted his tiny arms behind his back. Plastic zip cuffs hissed into place. The silence came fast and hard. "What the hell are you doing? He's just a kid." "He's 7, man," a woman screamed. Leah, Jameer's aunt. She came running with a blanket in her arms. "I'm his guardian. You're scaring him. Let go." "Back up," Holloway barked. Obstruction of an officer. This child refused lawful orders. People gasped. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. The badge on Holloway's chest gleamed with arrogant confidence. 18 years on the force. Dozens of complaints. None that stuck. This would blow over. They always did. He shoved Jameer into the back of the cruiser. The child was crying now. "Please, I didn't do anything. I want to go home." But home was a place Holloway didn't think about, not Jameer's, and especially not who lived there, because Jameer's full name wasn't just Jameer. It was Jameer Cole Washington. And the last man you wanted to disrespect in that city, especially on camera, was Captain Elijah Washington, head of internal affairs, son of a civil rights legend, and decorated military veteran. And Jameer? He was his only nephew. Back at the precinct, officers stiffened as Holloway dragged the child inside. Brent, maybe you want to double-check." "Paperwork's already started," Holloway snapped. Meanwhile, 20 blocks away, Elijah Washington watched the entire scene unfold. On Twitter, sent to him in a group text, tagged in dozens of comments, 47 seconds. That's how long it took to tear his soul in half. He didn't speak, didn't curse, just stood up, buttoned his coat, and made a single phone call. Not to the mayor, not to internal affairs, but to Colonel Latrice Daniels, former Army intelligence, now senior special counsel to the governor. "Latrice," he said, voice low, cold. "They arrested Jameer. I want full access. Every camera, every mic, every file. And I want that cop's history. Unredacted." She didn't ask questions. And within hours, the walls of the Foxwood PD would begin to sweat. Because when you arrest a black child for being joyful and you do it in front of witnesses, and he happens to be the blood of a man who built his entire life on exposing abuse of power, you don't just make a mistake, you ignite a fire. And this time, it wasn't going out quietly. The precinct was unusually quiet when Captain Elijah Washington walked in. Not silent, just aware. The kind of hush that follows a thunderclap, unnatural, vibrating with tension. Phones still rang, officers still moved, but no one met his eyes. They knew. Elijah's frame was calm but imposing. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his gold captain's badge pinned perfectly beneath a crisp lapel. But it wasn't the uniform or the medals that commanded the room. It was the gravity around him. The sense was that when he entered, truth had better stand up straight. He didn't break stride, didn't pause for greetings. He walked straight to the front desk, where the duty sergeant, Sergeant Green, fumbled with a clipboard. "Captain Washington, sir. We didn't expect." Where is the child? Elijah's voice was low, deliberate. Green swallowed. Holding room, but Captain, Holloway said the child. Elijah raised one finger, just one. Green stopped speaking. Bring him to conference room 2, and tell Officer Holloway to meet me there. 5 minutes. The sergeant moved like his shoes were made of stone. Meanwhile, in the cramped holding cell, Jameer sat alone on a hard bench, knees pulled to his chest, cheeks wet with dried tears. His shirt was damp, his face as red from crying. A juice box sat unopened on the table. When Elijah entered the room a few moments later, the child looked up, and for the first time relief flickered in his eyes. "Uncle Elijah." The captain's composure cracked for just a second. He knelt beside the boy, taking both small hands in his own. "You're safe now, nephew. I got you. No one's going to hurt you again." Jameer nodded slowly, blinking away the leftover fear. "He said I was a threat. I don't understand. I just had a balloon." Elijah's jaw tightened. In conference room 2, the air was frigid from overcompensating AC, but sweat beaded on Holloway's neck as he entered. He didn't expect to be called in so fast, or that Washington himself would be waiting. Elijah stood at the far end of the table, arms folded, cold stare fixed. Holloway tried to play confidently. "Captain, I followed protocol." The child resisted. "Resisted?" Elijah interrupted. "A 7-year-old, barefoot, holding a water balloon." Holloway's eyes flicked sideways. "I had reason to suspect. You didn't ask his name. You didn't check with the guardians. You didn't follow procedure. You cuffed a minor without cause. That's assault, Holloway." The officer's face flushed. He was being disruptive. Elijah stepped forward. "No, he was being black, and you assumed that meant danger." Silence. "You have 18 use-of-force complaints in 7 years, 5 pending, 2 settled quietly, and 1 internal warning from just last spring." Holloway's voice cracked. "You can't bring up sealed files." "I can," Elijah cut in, "because this one wasn't sealed. You shoved a kid into a cruiser on camera, and now the mayor's office is on fire. Dozens of citizens are outside. National outlets are already picking this up. Racist cop arrests 7-year-old black child in suburban park." Sound familiar? Holloway looked like he wanted to disappear into his boots. A sharp knock at the door broke the tension. It was Leah, Jameer's aunt, along with 2 attorneys from the city's legal aid division. One was already holding a manila folder. The other? A flash drive. Elijah nodded. "Officer Holloway," he said, "you are now officially under departmental review pending suspension, effective immediately." "I'm being suspended?" Holloway scoffed. "For this? For everything." Elijah replied coldly. "Your badge and weapon, now." As Holloway reluctantly removed them, a younger officer poked his head in, eyes wide. "Captain, sir, you should see the lobby." Elijah exchanged glances with Leah, then turned. Outside, the station front was flooded. Not just with protesters, not just with community members, with military veterans, black, brown, and white, uniforms, medals, families, holding signs that read, "Let black kids be kids. We protected this country, now protect our children." Among them, standing silently in the front row, was Colonel Latrice Daniels. Elijah stood behind the glass, watching, breathing. A reporter's microphone was already on the scene. The image of Jameer's arrest was looping on screen, with commentary growing by the hour. But Elijah didn't need to speak yet. He knew the next part was coming, because this wasn't just about one child anymore. This was about how a system reacted when power was challenged by a 7-year-old boy with nothing but a water balloon and a last name that refused to stay quiet. By noon, the local precinct was no longer just a station, it was a fortress under siege. But not from rioters, not from angry mobs or opportunists, from veterans, from active-duty soldiers, from commanders in pressed uniforms who once led battalions and now stood arm in arm with civilians, demanding accountability. Captain Elijah Washington stood on the front steps of the station, next to his sister Leah and little Jameer, now wrapped in a clean hoodie, clutching her hand, watching the wave of people chant his name like he was more than a boy. Like he was a cause. Then came the black Suburban. It rolled up silently, escorted by 2 military police cruisers. The windows were tinted, but the plates were unmistakable. Pentagon Registry. Doors opened. Out stepped a tall, commanding woman in a dark blue uniform lined with silver trim. Her name tag glinted beneath the midday sun. Brigadier General Naomi Ellis. She walked with intention, shoulders back, chin high, her presence sharper than any weapon. Every camera swiveled, Every phone lifted. Reporters gasped. Even the officers on the roof took notice. The general didn't pause to greet anyone. She marched directly toward Elijah and Leah. "I came for my godson," she said simply. Leah's eyes widened. "I served with your husband," Naomi said, softer now. "Jameer was named after our fallen squad mate. I won't stand by and watch his name get cuffed in a police report." She turned to Elijah. "And you, Captain, good job. But now it's time for Washington to answer to Washington." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You're invoking federal jurisdiction?" Naomi nodded. "The Pentagon has already been briefed. The images went viral this morning. We've got brass demanding action. And guess who's speaking in front of Congress next week about racial bias and federal funding to local enforcement?" She stepped back and faced the crowd. Then she saluted. Every uniformed soldier, Marine, Army, Navy, even a few ROTC cadets, snapped to attention. One of them began playing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" from a speaker, and somehow, under the Mississippi sun, the air thick with anger and shame, there was silence, and then power. "We are not here for revenge," General Ellis announced. "We are here for reckoning. A 7-year-old boy is not a threat, but systemic fear of that boy is." Her voice cut through the crowd like a rallying cry. She raised her hand again, signaling to a nearby staff officer. He opened a metal case and passed her a document. "This," she said, holding it up, "is a federal inquiry into this department's funding. You're now under investigation for violation of civil rights, profiling minors, and unlawful detention." Gas erupted. One of the precinct lieutenants stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, with respect, this is a local matter." Naomi shut him down with a single glare. "Respect doesn't mean immunity. This isn't just about what one officer did. It's about what the system allowed him to do. And the fact that if Jameer didn't have the last name Washington, he'd still be in that cage crying." Whispers rippled through the uniformed ranks behind the windows. Inside the precinct, phones were ringing off the hook. Washington Post, CNN, the NAACP, legal teams, school boards, city council members. The mayor was on line 3, and he was furious, but not at Elijah. The fact that a simple officer with a chip on his shoulder just dragged the entire city into a national reckoning. Meanwhile, General Ellis stepped forward and knelt beside Jameer. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder. "You are brave," she whispered. "Braver than half the men I've served with. And I promise you, no one will forget what happened today. Not because of what they did to you, but because of how you stood through it." Jameer blinked, unsure how to respond. Then he asked, "Are you going to make him say sorry?" Naomi smiled, tight and fierce. "No. I'm going to make sure he never gets to do this to anyone again." From somewhere in the crowd a chant began to rise. "Justice for Jameer! Justice for Jameer!" It echoed off the walls, past the courthouse steps, and into the soul of a city forced to finally look in the mirror. But inside the station, another officer, young, white, maybe 26, watched from behind the blinds. Officer Dent. He wasn't like Holloway. He'd seen the body cam footage. I saw the fear in Jameer's eyes. And now, he copied the video file to a private drive, just in case the department tried to delete it. Because reckoning was no longer optional. The aftermath was not swift. It was seismic. By the next morning, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Not just local affiliates, the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, Al Jazeera. The footage of 7-year-old Jameer being handcuffed, crying, with zip ties biting into his tiny wrists had become a symbol. A symbol of every unchecked stop, every silent prejudice, every uniform hiding behind procedure. But the true reckoning began at sunrise. Officer Holloway was still at home, drinking black coffee, his badge tossed casually on the kitchen counter. He hadn't expected suspension, not yet. The chief hadn't called. The union was still silent. He thought the media buzz would fade like every other time someone got upset about race. He was wrong. At 6:03 a.m., his front door was knocked on, not tapped, pounded. He opened it to find Elijah Washington in full dress blues. Behind him stood General Naomi Ellis, 2 federal agents, and 3 uniformed MPs. "Officer Holloway," Elijah said, voice steady. "You are hereby placed under federal investigation for civil rights violations, unlawful arrest, child endangerment, and abuse of authority." Holloway blinked. "You're kidding." Naomi stepped forward. "Do we look like we're joking?" Handcuffs snapped around his wrists. As he was escorted into the back of a black SUV, cameras were already waiting. "News vans?" Neighbors and protesters had been tipped off. No one tried to stop the recording. It was poetic justice. The man who put a child in cuffs now wore his own. But that was only the beginning. Within 48 hours, the Department of Justice had dispatched auditors. The entire precinct was placed under review. Body cam footage was demanded. Racial disparity reports subpoenaed. Officer Dent, the young cop who saved the backup files, became a whistleblower. In a closed-door hearing, he submitted damning evidence. Emails from supervisors advising officers to watch out for the kids from those neighborhoods. Training slide decks that ignored constitutional rights during juvenile encounters. And perhaps most chilling, a recorded hallway conversation where Holloway bragged, "Kids like that need to learn early who's in charge." The public went ballistic. Parents staged sit-ins. Military families released open letters. School districts launched emergency safety audits. Across social media, the hashtag #JameerWas7 trended for 7 straight days. City council scrambled. They convened an emergency session, streamed live. Leah Washington testified, her voice calm but laced with sorrow. "This isn't just about my son. It's about a city that let him become a target. About a uniform that saw a threat instead of innocence. About a system that trains fear instead of judgment." The mayor, facing re-election, couldn't afford neutrality. He fired the police chief, launched a civilian oversight board, and, under heavy pressure from General Ellis, pledged to reroute $6 million in funds toward community safety initiatives, trauma recovery for youth, and independent monitoring. But for Elijah Washington, it wasn't enough. He wanted to speak to the recruits. The police academy resisted at first, but under mounting pressure, they caved. In a packed lecture hall, he walked to the front. The same man whose nephew had been dragged across concrete by someone in their uniform. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He taught. If your badge gives you more fear than trust, you've failed before you begin. If you can't tell a tantrum from a threat, resign now. And if you ever find yourself justifying the harm of a child in the name of procedure, you don't deserve to serve. Silence. Then applause. And then resignations. 7 officers, including 3 with prior complaints, turned in their badges within a week. The precinct was changing, whether it liked it or not. Meanwhile, Holloway faced charges in federal court. His defense crumbled under video evidence, public backlash, and internal testimony. The jury was diverse. The verdict was swift: guilty. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, barred from ever serving in law enforcement again. But Jameer? He was healing. Therapy sessions are paid for by community donations. With a new scooter delivered by a group of young black officers, with letters from kids all over the country. One letter from a boy in Detroit read, "When I saw you on the news, I knew I wasn't the only one. I'm not scared anymore. Thank you, Jameer." The Washingtons didn't want fame. They wanted safety. They wanted the truth. And they got it, at a cost. But maybe, just maybe, that cost would spare another child from the same fate. A year passed. The seasons shifted, but the memory of that day didn't. Not for the Washingtons, not for the city, not for the nation. But something else changed too, slowly, quietly, and unmistakably. In elementary schools, officers stopped entering without cause. Teachers received trauma-informed training, and every child in Jameer's school was gifted a bracelet inscribed with the words, "I am protected." At the annual Memorial Day ceremony, General Naomi Ellis was invited to speak, not just as a military leader, but as a citizen who helped reshape her city. She looked over the crowd and said, "True protection doesn't start with weapons. It starts with dignity, with empathy, refusing to see a child as a problem before they've even spoken." The applause echoed for minutes. Leah Washington was there too, holding Jameer's hand. Her speech wasn't scripted. "None of this brings back what we lost that day, his trust, his innocence. But we stand here now so your children never have to lose theirs." That night, a mural was unveiled on the side of the precinct wall. It showed a young black boy on a scooter, surrounded by figures, teachers, soldiers, medics, officers, kneeling beside him, not in surrender, but in solidarity. Underneath it read, "Let justice begin with the smallest among us." Elijah Washington didn't return to active duty. Instead, he founded the Jameer Initiative, a foundation that trains officers in de-escalation, child psychology, and racial bias intervention. It becomes national within 2 years. And Jameer? He still has scars, some you can see, others you can't. But he's growing up knowing that his pain wasn't wasted. That is because of him. Thousands of other children might never have to taste fear from those sworn to protect them. The media moved on eventually, as it always does. But in the hearts of those who lived it and those who learned from it, one truth remains. Justice isn't a courtroom verdict. It's the courage to stand, the wisdom to change, and the love to protect what matters most. And that's a legacy no handcuffs can ever contain.